Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop RPG space. And this week, I'm joined by Frederic Walker, AKA Kor-Artificer. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I think this is one of the first guests I've had with essentially like a pseudonym, I suppose.
Yeah. I started homebrewing stuff on a Tumblr blog with that URL, and it's kind of ended up being what I'm known as permanently, I guess.
I guess it's a case of, with Tumblr, not everything that happens on Tumblr stays on Tumblr, I suppose.
Yeah.
it's the inverse of that sort of typical rule. But I guess so. I'm jumping the gun just a little bit, but Kor-Artificer, if correct me if I'm wrong, that is a Magic the Gathering card.
It's like a type for Magic the Gathering card. So when I first started designing like D&D homebrew stuff, it's because I thought I was going to run a campaign in Zendikar, which ended up never happening. But one of the things with Zendikar is that it's got the core people who are renowned artificers. Mm-hmm. So because I was making magic items for Zendikar, it just sort of popped into my head and just kind of became my blogging identity and homebrew identity and now writing identity for the past 4 or so years.
Well, I suppose that kind of answers the first. So literally, that was kind of how you started off. It was just kind of like with your blog on Tumblr, and then I guess
when it was just like a sort of I was bored on shift one day at work and thought, that's a campaign I want to run. I might come up with some items for it.
So I guess when did you make the transition into kind of publishing things onto DMsGuild, or like what was the first thing you put together?
The first thing I put together on DMsGuild was it was my roguish archetype Highwayman, which I published at about the end of 2018. And it's sort of like laid the groundwork thematically for a lot of stuff I've published because so much of my stuff is related to my interest in history.
Oh, interesting.
And like that's sort of taken off like both the stuff I was doing, blogging, Magic the Gathering related stuff, and stuff like history related things have like both taken off together in my work on the Theros setting with the Odyssey anthology last year.
So I was going to say, so before we get too far away, so was it the ideal to try and do a historically accurate Highwayman like subclass, I suppose?
Yeah, kind of like just like playing off the very specific themes of like it like all my design tends to be like top down focused rather than like coming up with a cool mechanic and working how to build a theme around it. It's more like, how can I mechanically represent this theme? So the Highwayman Rogue is about intimidation and quick getaways.
Yeah, like was it the go-to thing is like stand and deliver, isn't it?
It definitely has an ability called that. If it doesn't, I fell at the first hurdle.
You can't not. No, interesting. And I suppose as well. So one thing that again I noticed across like looking across your catalog of products, there is definitely a kind of there's you quite fond of the kind of I guess Magic the Gathering. I was about to say extended universe, treating it like but I mean the sort of Theros, Ravnica. There is a third one in the mix from it literally is there is. So as you mentioned, there was Zendikar, but they released some soft D&D integration rules, if I remember.
Yeah, the plane shift PDFs.
Yeah, which wasn't quite like. It not like a fully fledged hardcover, but it's kind of that. I suppose it was kind of them testing the waters to see if those sort of hardcovers.
Yeah.
But I guess the other question is it literally just because you were interested in Magic the Gathering that kind of again with Theros in particular? Was it a combination of that you really liked the history as you mentioned, as well as the settings, or is there something kind of that uniquely draws you to all these MTG worlds?
I think like with going into D&D, I was like I didn't know anything about D&D when I started playing, but I knew a lot about Magic the Gathering because I've been playing that a lot longer. And like I'd been playing other role-playing games before D&D, but when I started playing D&D, sort of coincided with the first of the plane shift PDFs. So I was like, oh, I can build all this stuff from these worlds that I already know and love. But with working on Theros, that's kind of been almost overtaken by like my interest in the actual history of ancient Greece.
So I suppose it's well. So I guess there is that awkward balance where obviously it's deeply Greek inspired with obviously the mythos and everything, but then it is distinctly its own plane. Are there sort of times where you kind of have to you either bend the history to fit the lore or you bend the lore to kind of is it like how do you fight that balance?
Like it's a tricky one because like there's a lot of probably the biggest mismatch for me is like how different the gods are. So working out how to keep the sort of themes of like ancient Greek stories while maintaining the setting's gods, which are slightly different but still sort of play in the same space, has been both like tricky at times, but also a lot of fun.
Interesting. And so I suppose are there what's one of your favorite stories, or what has been kind of your favorite product, at least within Theros, that you've kind of been able to tell, pulling on like your love for history, I suppose?
I think I mean I've loved designing pretty much everything I've worked on for Theros, and the Odyssey anthology is kind of my baby, if you will, just because like that was the sort of there's the point that kicked me off in like actually doing heavy research into the history as well as like exploring the lore. Like when I was writing for Ravnica, it was just kind of more based on like the lore of the setting that is like available in like the Magic the Gathering art books and novels and that kind of thing. But with Theros, I've just kind of got like from the start of the first Odyssey anthology book, I was going into researching like the specifications and like combat uses of triremes, ancient Greek religious rites, that sort of thing.
And I was speaking of kind of like religious rites. There's, I must say, there's the Godsend as a product really kind of jumped out to me, being as like I suppose like the idea of like just killing the gods. I suppose is kind of, but there are so many sort of campaigns out there that kind of have that sort of campaign arc where you're dealing with a village, and then by the end of the campaign you're fighting like multiple gods, or what was it? I guess what did I guess with Godsend in particular, what kind of niche, or what was the kind of aim for that product in particular?
I think with Godsend, it's like it's a design choice I'm particularly proud of. That like the whole concept of it is that like the first Theros sets that for Magic the Gathering that they did were about an evil god, like an evil humanoid turning himself into a god, then being slain by a hero who is then killed by one of the gods for proving that she is capable of killing a god. So I wanted to do this. I wanted with Godsend to present like the death of a god in a very particular way. Like on the one hand, I could have written stat blocks for each god, but that's like sort of turned out to be really not what I wanted to do with it. And I took a lot of inspiration from God of War 2018.
Interesting.
So I found myself going down the path of narrative tool rather than just mechanics for fighting gods, like in-depth stuff of like, how does the Pantheon react? How do their worshippers react? And it felt like designing that was a bit of a departure from what a lot of people criticize D&D for at times, as being like solely combat-based power fantasy. And like, while the system does lend itself in some ways in that direction, I know that there are players who want to tell complex stories that aren't just centered about an epic boss battle with a god, and who would rather be more interested in looking at from like, one of the gods is dead, what effect is that going to have on our world?
So interesting. Was it the case that the kind of trajectory of the project was that you kind of started off thinking about sort of stat blocks for these kind of gods, and you kind of veered away from it, or kind of from the get-go you're like, stat blocks just don't necessarily mesh with this idea of telling us like I guess a non-combat focused story?
Yeah, I think like from the get-go I kind of didn't want it to be presented in any way as your sort of end campaign boss fight.
Yeah,
I think it's it's more something that you would want to use like either to start a campaign or to add a new like level of complexity to the world in the middle of a campaign, that like a player or an NPC is a god killer who has changed the world, and your campaign is watching the world react to that.
No, I must admit that again, like, was it like as a campaign start, saying that like, I don't know, like, a god is dead is probably like a really strong start, and the same way of like trying to, I suppose, nestle in the fact that you're engaging in a living, breathing world. Having a god kill another god, I imagine, is probably quite fitting for like the kind of Theros setting of like, oh, you know, they just kill each other sometimes. It happens, you know. No, awesome, interesting. Yeah, and then I guess as kind of like as a whole, there's not really like a sort of well, I guess in your own words, would you say that there's a particular type of product that you kind of lean towards? Because it feels like you've kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything with.
Yeah, I kind of starting off, I was more like focused on just writing mechanics. Particularly when I was blogging, it was just like, here's a new spell or a subclass or some magic items or a monster. But like, I've kind of, as you said, like I've gone a bit all over the place.
It's like that. It's hard not to, especially when it comes to like you know, collaborations and that sort of thing. It's like, oh, you know, you just sign up, you throw your hat into the ring, and next thing you know, you're no longer making items. You're like, oh, I've written an adventure now, or I'm not writing like I'm writing how to kill gods as like a, you know, like an assistant tool. No, interesting, and I guess then. Okay, so if we're assuming like a neutral product that hasn't taken any sort of shape or form just yet, what is your kind of first steps then? What is like, how does your creative process necessarily begin? Is it kind of, again, instantly drawing from history, or
it always tends to be like coming from like not really like seeing like a niche in the space that like, oh, the system hasn't filled this. It's more like, this is something from history or like paleontology at times that I'm interested by. How could I mechanically represent the themes that I pick up from that?
Yeah.
So like with like my first product, the Highwayman, it's very much like how can I mechanically represent exactly the sort of theme of like the rides out, stand and deliver, flees away on horseback, jumping over gates and that kind of thing. And that's sort of played into all of my work. When Ghost of Saltmarsh released, I released the of Smoke and Splinters expanded maritime combat rules. And that was fully like just taking my interest in maritime history and being like, okay, how can I like use my interest and knowledge here to let players fight their own naval battles with the rules in Ghost of Saltmarsh.
And I suppose sort of expand it out to more than just sort of like ship to ship to, again, I'm showing my lack of understanding of maritime. Is that's like large scale ship battles or larger scale?
Yeah. Yeah, Battle of Trafalgar sort of thing.
Nice. Oh, wow, geez. Yeah, no, I guess there is, you kind of touched on an interesting point that sometimes it is the case of like, sometimes you do notice, I guess, like voids in design space of where you think, oh, you know, that there aren't necessarily like a mechanics in place to kind of facilitate these sorts of, you know, encounters. But other times, yeah, it's kind of interesting to hear about the just kind of starting from like an interesting point of like, I like the idea of a highwayman. I just kind of want to kind of do you have any, I guess, like, again, with all your Theros work, or I guess with your I guess interest in Greek mythology, is there one particular kind of like bit of history that you were really happy to try and mechanify, themify? I don't know what, like, they all sound like spells, but
I had a lot of fun with certain elements of the Odyssey anthology and Darren Kenny's Book of Myth series, where I took just was able to hone in on very specific parts of history or like very specific individuals and look at how to represent them. So in the Odyssey anthology, each of the volumes has 10 islands, which are like 2,500 word adventure. And for volume, I wrote an adventure for each of the volumes, and my adventure for volume 3 is I was kind of stuck for an idea, and I just came up with like, what if I used grungs to tell the story of Aristophanes played the frogs, but all the characters are actually frogs.
I suppose, yeah, no, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's so interesting. No, awesome, and yeah, I suppose that's what's kind of great about having with at least with the Odyssey and like having those sort of isolated islands. You do kind of have that leeway to be like, well, I mean, anything can kind of go. There could be this and I do like grungs. They have like a soft spot in my heart for them, just because they are just little. I think I have the problem where I think they're cuter than what the lore represents them as, because I think they're pretty.
Oh,
vicious.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like look, there's like rainbow frogs, but it's like no, they're pretty vicious. One thing I did want to ask is, so you mentioned how each of these were like 2,500 words, which isn't a lot. I'm curious about how exactly, like, again, in writing adventures, I'm quite wordy, which I'm sure my editors hate me for. But how did you find kind of navigating an adventure into a relatively kind of small scope?
Yeah, Odyssey Anthology was tricky because it was my first time running a project, and I was kind of working out like what an appropriate length would be for like if we're having 10 of these adventures in every volume. So it ended up being quite heavily limited. And that was also kind of based on, we had a sort of template island adventure that like everyone then worked way more like outside of the scope of that. And it's like, okay, let's give everyone more space because everyone is enjoying this.
Yeah.
And
so,
we can create better content that way.
Was it that the original island was like, like 500, like 1,000 words? Was it?
It was like 1,500 words, but it quickly became clear that wasn't enough to like give everyone the free reign they wanted to like fully actualize their creations.
It's tough. It's literally it's hard to kind of like unless you're like writing to a word count. It's hard to kind of quantify how many words you need.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it does sometimes resort to like things kind of getting left on the chopping block. I guess from the first volume to the third, did you find it kind of got easier over time to kind of keep with that, or were there still like depending like was there so much grung action going on in the third one that
I think it was difficult to condense like this Aristophanes play down to 2,000 words, including combat encounters.
Yeah.
But like even with that, it did get easier over the course of the 3 volumes.
Nice. No, and then I guess is there any plans for a fourth, or?
Probably not at the moment. I know like some of the writers are interested in like maybe a sequel to their island, so nice. It's like a possibility, but quite a distant one at the moment because like just other workload.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
Ahead of that.
So I guess was the Odyssey anthology one of the first projects you led, or was?
Yes, it was my first time leading a project, and it vastly grew out of the proportion I had expected for it.
I guess if kind of like in your own words, then I mean, like how did you like? How did the idea come about, and how did you find kind of navigating that first, going from just creating stuff when like as like it's weird. It does feel almost like transformative the moment you have that first project lead. It kind of changes the way you view everything.
Yeah, it really does. Like with like the general idea of it I'd had was like I was brainstorming stuff for Theros, and I wanted to do something with like rules for sea travel because like it's so prominent in ancient Greece, in like all these major events and stories like the Odyssey, and like equally between like the Odyssey and the Peloponnesian War.
Big on boats.
Yeah, and I kind of like was putting in my drafts like, oh, I'll do like a few random roll tables for what these weird islands you might come across are, and just sort of reading the Odyssey as I was doing that kind of put me in a position where it's like, it would be more fun if we just put a lot more detail onto islands. So I'll make a call for 10 writers to each write their own island, and that quickly got so overwhelmed that it became 30 like islands and 3 volumes rather than just the 1 volume we had. Well, 1 volume I'd planned for when I first came up with the thought of doing the project.
So was it the case of like, so the initial call out got so many replies that you were like, okay, I'm going to do this in stints now of like 10 by 10 by 10? Or was it that you did the first, again, I'm curious about the timeline now.
Yeah, because it was originally planned to be just like one piece with 10 island adventures plus the extra Greek ship rules that I'd written for it. But like as we got so many responses, I was quickly like, we can do this in stages, because well, for one thing, it'll probably like get better sales if we did it that way. And that's proven to have gone quite well, rather than like releasing all of it for a very high price as one product. So we kind of went with our original schedule we had in mind for writing just the 10, but then like laddered 2 other schedules on top of that, which got confusing and stressful at times, and has definitely like given me something to think about next time I'm running a project like this.
I mean, it is tough though, because I suppose like doing a like call for authors, like especially when you like, did you do like a pitch part of like with people applying that they could kind of pitch like a high concept idea for the island? Or
yeah, so the whole thing was that we would take we had a Google form that people could just submit like how to get in contact with them and a pitch for their island, and we like went through all of the island pitches and selected the ones we liked the best without looking at who had sent them.
Yeah. But then I suppose it is that case of like when you have a pitch attached, like, or just like a bunch of anonymous pitches, it's I can't imagine like cutting them down to 10. Like that would be so you just like you're immediately
I mean like
yeah,
we got, I think it was like 53 in total when we'd asked for 10, and it just drove us into like I say us because I was I can't like claim I ran it alone, because Sticky Hunter is also massively responsible for keeping that project together and keeping me sane throughout it.
So I guess as well. So with Sticky on it, was it the case of they were early? I suppose like early adopters, as if it was like some sort of tech company. But
it's more that like me and Sticky Hunter are like we work together on pretty much every project we do. So
yeah.
If I'm writing, Sticky Hunter's doing the art. If Sticky Hunter's writing and doing the art, I'm doing the editing for them.
Yeah, it is funny how you do notice that like these sort of, I guess, I was business relationships. I don't know, these business partnerships. They do kind of like form across like the DMs, and it's nice. It kind of shows the kind of, you know, the building, like, I don't know, like building a decent a decent professional relationship. I don't want to suggest or allude to anything, but no, yeah, and I suppose it is that case of like it's kind of that reliability to be like, I know I can trust this person. They can, you know, deliver each and every.
That was a really good thing that came out of the Odyssey anthology. Actually, was that like I have, through the process of making that, found myself in contact with some really nice people to work with, who I'm definitely who I've worked with on other stuff since then, like Godsend.
Yeah. So no, it's like kind of like the speed running way of making contacts is to run a project with like 10 or 30 individuals, because instantly you've got 30 people that you now have contact information with.
Yeah.
So I guess, so before talking more about your favorite and least favorite parts of a project, on a project management front, was there any sort of key lessons that you felt you learned?
Oh gosh. I think oh god, this is tricky.
Yeah, it's a tough.
There was a lot that I picked up from doing it, and I think it's while I'm struggling to come up with like a particular thing now, there's a lot of like if you're managing a project, the main things are like even if you're lenient with deadlines, just like have deadlines there.
Yeah.
Have a clear plan of what has to be done by when, just so everyone knows what they're doing, when they need it to be done by, because like I've been in projects that have done that and projects that haven't done that, and the projects that haven't done that have had a considerably higher level of stress to them.
Yeah, I suppose it's always a case of the more people you have involved in a project, the more, not urgency, but the more need there is for kind of hard set deadlines, because immediately there's the editors have like take what was it, take the anthology for example, they have 10 islands to go through, and then once that's all through editing, then that has to go through all layout, so already you're looking at like a longer timeline to get the project out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I suppose it's difficult to balance, and especially when I think you never want to be the person like not harassing, but like, hey, it's deadline tomorrow. I hope everyone's having a good time and not. I don't want to cause anyone stress, but you know, it's a balance of like. But some people, like, again, by their own admission, they are the sort of like, oh, I've got a deadline in 2 hours. Well, that's ideal time. I do my best writing when it's in like a stress fuse. No, awesome. No, fair. That kind of makes sense. It's a delicate balance. But to talk about, I suppose, yeah, the pros and cons of your creative process as a whole. What is your favorite part of each project?
I think my favorite part of any project is designing the particular aspect where it relates to the source material that inspired it. So I've mentioned like the Aristophanes play with inspiring one of the islands for the Odyssey anthology, but sticking with ancient Greece, like the archetypes that I designed for Book of Myth, the big sort of anthology collection of a lot of ancient Greek and Theros themed archetypes.
Yeah.
I just had a wonderful time designing 2 of those in particular. They're both bard archetypes.
Nice.
One of them is a historian bard based on Herodotus.
Nice.
Where like the mechanics are focused on like talking to NPCs in a specific area, writing down like what you learn about the local history, and like with various options of what the local history can be, and those options being usable as like a way you can provide boons to your allies. So like if you've recorded histories of war, you can be more resistant to being surprised, and if you've recorded histories of trade, you can add your bardic inspiration die to certain like rolls for bartering.
Awesome. No, that is such a really, really cool idea. And what was the second bard? You mentioned you had 2.
The second one was kind of a play on the College of Eloquence bard that appeared in the Theros book, because I looked at that and like, this represents a lot of ancient Greek philosophers, but there's one it doesn't represent that I'd really like to do as a sort of complete antithesis to this. So I made the College of the Cynic bard, inspired by Diogenes of Sinope.
That is the the shaved chicken guy?
Yes.
Was it? I forget the quote exactly, but was it something about the shaved chicken of being equivalent to a man, I think?
Yeah, so it's Plato defines a man as a featherless biped, and Diogenes runs into one of his speeches holding up a plucked chicken and shouts, "Behold Plato's man."
Which, yeah, I suppose. So the was it OG shit poster?
Yeah. So it like the subclass is completely about like shouting out ridiculous contradictions to other people, like stun abilities that will stun people when you do things like counterspell.
Nice. Oh, interesting. Yeah, kind of having like well, I mean, being counterspelled is bad enough. Being stunned on top is like added insult to injury.
Yeah, it's like here's all my arcane theory, and sort of this bard like running in and shouting, "That's hypocrisy. Here's a plucked chicken."
The weave is a lie. No, also, and I suppose did you pick these bards, or like was it a case of like you have a natural affinity towards bards?
It was more that like I wanted to design things to represent these two figures from history, and felt that bards would be the best way to do it.
I suppose if you do look at like yeah, there are a lot of charismatic characters. I suppose it's kind of a lot of them I imagine do lend themselves to bards quite nicely because they either people who chroniclers what were the people who chronicle things and yeah, sort of they're talking of like all the sort of again more traditional like actual bards that were around at the time, or muses I suppose as well. Wow, fair. No, interesting. And I suppose you mentioned as well the with some of the adventures that you've done kind of based on kind of history or the mythos, and were there any sort of interesting kind of mechanics that you kind of spiced in?
With the Odyssey anthology, my island for volume 2 was it's called Menuvos the Ashen Vineyard. Ooh. And it's the synopsis is that it's a volcanic island which had an eruption several years ago, where the farm owners fled the island to safety but left their workers to die. They've come back, retaken the island, and have started growing their grapevines there again. But these ghosts made of volcanic ash are starting to appear on the island when the players arrive. And designing like the ghosts made of volcanic ash based on like stuff I've learned like visiting Pompeii and that kind of thing was really fun. Like how exactly do these horrible ghosts that I'm creating kill their victims with volcanic ash?
Yeah, I suppose it's like because again with Pompeii and stuff like that, was it literally the fact that they were encased in volcanic ash, or just because that's kind of gave them this sort of statue like
yeah, so I kind of made the sort of, what do I call them, ash spirits, as like they're a sort of mechanical representation of like a living pyroclastic flow. Mm-hmm. So like they deal fire damage, but they can also like blow volcanic ashes into the lungs of whatever they're fighting against.
Oh, that's nasty. Yeah. Jeez. No, also wow. Fair. No, it's kind of. I must admit, when you said the ashen like vine, my mind did go straight to God of War again with Kratos. Just because what was it? I don't know why, but yeah, I imagine like because his field's burning. And he was cursed with the like that's what like if I remember again. This is showing me my lack of idea, but Kratos is covered in the ashes of his wife and child?
I'm not sure. I'm afraid the only God of I'm a bit of a fake God of War fan because the only one I've played is 2018.
I must admit, so this is in conversation that my understanding is from conversations of actual God of War fans. So that's I'm like just as removed. But we'll just say, you know what, there's no one's gonna fact check me. We'll just say that's the ash is it's but yeah, before I do get fact checked. On the other side of the coin, what is your kind of like least favorite part of any individual project?
I always find putting together like the first skeleton draft the most tricky thing, like especially with adventures. Like you have all these ideas, but like even with a structure, even like if you've already come up with the structure, I still find myself in a state of like, oh god, what part do I write first? How do I make sure it links up? How do I like if I'm just going to write one part and save another part for another evening, how am I going to make sure they're still thematically the same vibe?
And it's surprisingly difficult to write an adventure chronologically, like from start to finish, like bit by bit by bit. Sometimes your mind like gravitates towards certain encounters that you kind of want to like at least I do. You kind of want to bounce about, which doesn't necessarily help that sort of keep that thematic flow through.
Yeah.
Which I suppose that's why we get editors. I suppose so. What is one way that you've kind of, I suppose, combat, like how do you kind of get over that kind of speed bump of putting together the skeleton? Have you found any kind of methods that kind of help?
I think like something which has helped me is that I will like if I'm having that kind of issue with a project, I can like just work on another project I have. Like I end up with a few projects knocking about, just like somewhere in my Google Drive that I can just go from one to the other, and like this will give me a fresh perspective when I come back to that one.
Yeah, I must admit the idea of like, oh, I'm really stuck with this problem. You know what? I will go fight a different problem. And but no, that is kind of how it works. And sometimes, having that time away from a project, because there's always that thing of like, sometimes if you're really stuck in a problem, you should just sleep on it, which always feels backwards, because you're like, I want to fix a problem, sleep, but it's like your brain does kind of like, the number crunching that you kind of need beforehand. You only hope you don't have the thing where you wake up, like you have that dream that has the solution, and then you wake up and you're like, I should write this down. But you're like, I'm too sleepy right now. I'll just remember it. And then you never do, just because like either one, it didn't make sense, or like you look at your notes and you're just like, I this is a gibberish, or you just kind of forget it. No, I must admit, I think I'm actually in a state right now where I only have one like project on the go. And maybe this is a sign that I need to get a second one. I need to kind of break things up, because it's I think mine's the opposite, where I have quite an easy time putting the skeleton together, but it is the process of going through and filling out, fleshing things out that sometimes is quite laborious. So maybe I need to go start up a second pool and just kind of paddle about. No, awesome. And then I guess overall then, so looking at like a kind of everything that you've done, is there like a particular design choice that you have that you're particularly kind of proud of?
I think like if I have to like go back to one particular thing in that regard, I would have to go back to Godsend and the particular choice to make it a narrative tool and not a combat system.
Yeah. I guess as well. So you can kind of mention, well, so with each, how many gods are there in Theros? Because
15 and a dead one.
Wow. Well, I suppose that they did your work for you. Wow, 15 is a lot of gods. But how quickly did the structure of that, of like, okay, well, here's how the other gods react, here's how their followers react, how quickly did that structure kind of emerge now that you kind of like aware that it was going to be a narrative tool?
I think I came up with that like quite quickly. Like I think the longest thing for this project, for the project, was just like filling spaces and like polish. So a lot of Godsend is just like how it's about, like a lot of Godsend is how this shapes the world and like what elements you need to look at for that. So what I've like found myself stuck on the most was like filling out certain spells to represent certain gods, filling out like here's a specific example of what could happen if this god is the one that is killed, for all 15 of them in Theros.
Was it kind of I imagine was it kind of easy to kind of connect the relationship between gods? Because I'm with certain pantheons of gods, that like in certain things they have kind of this kind of rich history, but then there are always like one or two gods that like are two ends of the pantheon that never seem to have any like was that kind of easy to kind of bridge those gaps to be like, oh no, this god would actually maybe care a little bit, or just they would be like,
yeah, like with Godsend, the relationships between the gods in Theros aren't really explored all that much. So I sort of did what I needed to cover that, and like terms of like what gods would probably take over another god's position, like their domain.
Because I suppose that's something of like an interesting question of like when it comes to gods in particular, like at least with the Forgotten Realms, there is very much that idea of someone kind of has to step in to take over these domains. Were there any gods, or was there ever the temptation of like, what would happen if there was no, like, this domain just stopped getting representation as a deity?
Yeah, one of the things that is really fun with writing about the gods in Theros is that because the lore behind them is that they are created by, just like by the nature of the world, human belief or humanoid belief will create these gods. So there is this sort of there is this thing in Theros of like gods' domains do have a history of changing, and like there wasn't always a sun god. Heliod was previously a god of another domain, and I wanted to like very specifically represent that with certain gods' deaths. So I think for Heliod's death, I have written the day following Heliod's death, the sun rises unchanged.
Ooh, interesting.
That's just the first line of it, but it's fun. I think with Heliod in particular, I wanted the consequences of that god's death, if it were to happen, to get like people within the setting questioning what their relationship with the gods are, or what their relationships with the gods is. Like
no, I mean, yeah,
wondering why it's not changed. You know?
And like you instantly think of like, if the god of the sun dies, you would just expect, well, I guess there's no more sun. I suppose we live in a cult. But yeah, no, that is like a really good cut, because I suppose I must admit that is always one that kind of, it makes me curious, or just like I'm always curious about when the gods of the sun kind of emerge, because I guess it is always the case that it's normally believed in, like, they are the god that brings the sun or moves it about, and that's why you have the god of the moon as well to kind of balance things out. But if their duty isn't to like move the sun, like what do they do? What do they get up to on a day-to-day basis? Like what other sun duties could they have if not moving the sun? I suppose this is more of like, I guess, like a personal thing, but like out of the 15 and dead god, which one's your favorite?
I feel like over the course of making the Odyssey anthology, I sort of developed a working relationship with Thassa, god of the sea. And I like how particularly fickle she can act in the lore, as a sort of like the sea gives and the sea takes.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine. Like most representations of the sea is kind of very fickle. Like they kind of go with the tempest of the sea. I guess the other side is like, oh, you have them very sort of aloof and very go with the flow. But then that doesn't give, like, that's not like big god energy. Like a god that's kind of like going, whatever happens. It's, you kind of want them to be that sort of fickle where you don't never truly know how you stand with them.
I think with Odyssey Anthology Volume 2 having the religious rites in it, and having like what gods will do if you don't appease them before you set sail, kind of like taking inspiration from like how in the story of like the siege of Troy leading up to the Iliad, how the Greek ships won't be allowed to set sail by the gods unless Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter for them. So kind of playing in that same sort of space of like, if you don't remember to like pour your libations or make a sacrifice before you set sail on your adventures, Thassa is not going to be happy, and she is going to send all manner of horrible ocean phenomena at your ship.
It's I get it. It makes sense. I suppose it's, you know, you imagine, like, you try again. It's you trying to imagine like yourself as a god. Is the only best way to do it. Is like the idea of like, I'm the god of the sea. I rule everything in the sea. You want to passage across my sea. You've got to, you know, you got to pay me. Essentially, like I need some tides. No, interesting, and yeah, it kind of makes sense why you kind of like you've worked a lot with islands and the sea. Then I guess I guess as well. So if you had to write for another, I guess if you had to write for another Magic the Gathering setting, is there one that you like? What, maybe one that hasn't necessarily had, because there's Ixalan, there's Innistrad, sorry. There's so many other really cool settings with Magic the Gathering. Is there one that you would still be interested in writing for that isn't necessarily available?
I think like while my interest has more moved into like historical based stuff, certainly at the moment, I would definitely not be opposed to writing stuff for Ixalan, because
dinosaurs,
pirates, dinosaurs. What more can you ask for?
Then I guess actually no, that's a good question to kind of like the other side then. So like, okay, so Ixalan would be great for keeping on the Magic the Gathering front. Is there a particular branch of history that you haven't had a chance to write for yet that you're kind of
I have a particular interest in ancient history, and one of the fields which like definitely feels lesser known in D&D, just because like there are, well, clearly lesser known in D&D because there are no monster representations from it in the monster manual or the expansions, is like ancient Sumerian mythology. I'd really love to see something with that. Like I love the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'd love to like do a piece exploring the themes of that, the gods of that time period, and those cultures, and the sort of very unique mythological creatures they had at that time as well.
Interesting. No, fair. I suppose, yeah, I guess it is a case of where you can sort of see that certain, at least with the Forgotten Realms, there are definitely certain areas that in the past took kind of I guess inspiration from some of these things, but so again, a good chunk of that content, especially anything outside the Sword Coast, is I can only assume horrifically dated, and kind of needs a kind of revitalization with you know topics handled with, you know, maybe a little bit more sensitivity. But no, also no, it's always, I think, yeah, it's always kind of interesting to kind of take inspiration from the past and have these kind of homages. Yeah, I think in fairness, I've been doing a fair bit with like kind of like on not DMsGuild, but like RPG adjacent things of like fighting a fair bit of like Arthurian history, which isn't again, I guess does it count as history if it's all myth and or just like legends? It's that weird.
I mean, I think it's of such cultural significance that it should be definitely like held in an equal standing as ancient history. I mean, like
there's enough.
It's such an important part of like the cultures that it appears in.
Yeah, no, 100%, and yeah, it's kind of, it feels, I suppose it's that thing of like where as someone who is painfully British, I feel like I have not an affinity for King Arthur, but I just like that's you know that's they mention locations that I'm aware of, or you know, but no that's awesome. It's kind of interesting to kind of hear about, you know, the you know, some of the potential projects maybe off in the far future of like, you know, as the journey of writing takes us, because we never really know where it's going to go. On the whole then, is there any sort of particular lesson that you kind of wish you'd learned? Because we spoke a little bit about project management, but I'm maybe more on like a, you know, design front, or
I think on a design front there's something that like particularly harkening back to when I was designing stuff on a weekly basis on my Tumblr blog, which like I have no idea how I kept up that workload. But one of the big things is like when you're designing a mechanic, always look for precedents in the existing rules and don't like find yourself reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, no, that in fairness, like again, you can get quite far by literally just taking like a combination of abilities and then just kind of Frankensteining them together to kind of get the desired effect.
So much of the early like mechanics design I was doing was in a vacuum, if you will. So I like if you look for precedents in the rules and you figure out how WotC designs official content, it becomes so much easier to like actually get silly with it and do so in a way that like still functions within the 5e system.
So actually I wanted to ask, so how long were you doing sort of like weekly designs of, you know, creatures, items, subclasses?
Gosh, I started that in about March 2017 and kept going with that up until publishing stuff in up until I started publishing stuff on DMsGuild, really.
So, and I must admit, so I do think there's actually a good amount of merit in sort of these self-imposed weekly challenges. Because I imagine, like, did you feel like you learned a considerable amount by literally just every week just doing something little? I feel like you just
definitely like it. It certainly, like, for one thing, just like helped me not get bored at work, just with that ticking along in the back of my head. But it definitely like doing that constantly really helped me to pick up like how the system works. And I love learning systems, like whether it be RPG systems or like cataloging systems at museums or things like that. And like as well as that, it helped me build a following, which was very useful when I actually started releasing paid content.
So I guess, like, if you know what I'm saying, so how much of a following did you get through the, because I imagine going from Tumblr across to, like, you know, other streams, it's I mean, I spend way too much time on Twitter, so I'm not well versed in the Tumblrverse or
Tumblr is a difficult one at times because just kind of it has a nature to it of like even if you have a lot of followers, they aren't necessarily going to see what you create. Mm-hmm. But like, I suppose that's an issue with Twitter as well.
Yeah.
But like the sort of turnover of encouraging anyone who follows me on my Tumblr blog to follow my Twitter hasn't really picked up. Like I have around like 840 or so on Twitter, but on Tumblr, let's check the count right now. 11,000.
Wow. Okay, fair. Yeah, geez. How do you find navigating like an audience? Because I imagine most posts of like content still end up on Tumblr.
Yeah, there's not so much interaction on Tumblr. Definitely like not as much as I've definitely in this context. Mm-hmm. It just kind of a lot of people followed for like what I was doing that was effectively like fan rules for just things from Magic the Gathering, but also like occasionally like video games I like.
Yeah.
And it's a surprise I've still maintained that following to the extent that I have. But it's oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was gonna say, it's just fascinating because again, I had the chance to chat to a few people as well who kind of come from Reddit as kind of as their kind of home brewing ground. And it's kind of fascinating to kind of hear about like I was about to call it a Tumblr origin story, but I don't know if that's the right phrasing. It's kind of interesting about again how particular social medias kind of accommodate to. Again, the feedback we got from Reddit was the fact that people were very liberal with their criticism, and not necessarily all of it being constructive. But from what I kind of gather with Tumblr, was it that the engagements aren't necessarily as conversational based, or like it's
it's normally just reblogging, so sharing in the same format as retweeting, and any comments will normally just be like put in the tags as someone reblogs it, which before you got notifications for that, I sort of found myself fishing through that when I was like on my lunch break at work.
Nice. I suppose, nice. So then actually, speaking of kind of community as a whole, then, is there anyone or like some group of people in the tabletop RPG community that like particularly inspires you?
Oh, I'm gonna have to say a few, if that's okay.
I said it's I can't, again, it's hard to single out any individual, but no, by means, race, preach.
I think first I have to say Satine Phoenix, who was ultimately responsible for me publishing on DMsGuild. I met her at a sort of D&D community meet in London at one point, and was chatting about like all the stuff I'm publishing on the blog, and she just went, "This is really good. Why aren't you putting it on DMsGuild?" And just kind of, why am I not doing that? And ended up like publishing my next thing out in a couple of months after that.
Wow. So okay, asterisk. It's not a Tumblr origins. It's a Satine. Wow. Well, that's such an awesome story.
Yeah, the mentor in the origin story.
It all comes together. This is a whole thing.
But yeah, I'm also gonna have to say Zeke Gonzalez. Like, he's been a real pleasure to work with, and his products just they always feel like they demonstrate the cool stuff you can do with an academic field that you're so interested in. And like, it's a field that I have a sort of adjacent interest to, like the ecology paleontology thing, like side of it. Whenever I've worked with him, it's always been like, oh, I can put in this thing that I got interested in, like when I was watching Walking with Dinosaurs as a kid, or
and he's very much coming from the very sort of like biology side of like, oh, well, this exists in our real world. We just now need to kind of mechanify it.
Yeah, I think like that drives me to create interesting stuff based on my interest in history in the same way.
Yeah. It's also kind of good. There's so much people can pull from their day-to-day lives to kind of boost or like, bump up their own creations.
And I cannot list people who inspire me in the RPG community without like mentioning Sticky Hunter, who I've worked with on pretty much all of my projects and like pretty much all of their projects as well. And yeah, the two of us are just like constantly inspiring each other for like chucking ideas around, seeing what each of us want to write or do art for.
Nice. No, thick as thieves, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, awesome. No, again, I do. I got the warm fuzzies. Again, it's always that case of like, I can't disagree. There's nothing to disagree on. It's a fantastic group of people. Then, like, oh, geez, I glanced the time briefly, and I feel like we have. Dude, it flies by. But I don't want to even consider ending without chatting about first some of the things that you're currently working on, and secondly, where can people find news about your work if they're not already following you on Tumblr? Sorry.
So currently working on a little Ravenloft project that we're both aware of.
Oh, we are, yes, we are indeed. Yeah, we get around, don't we?
Yeah, some pretty exciting Ravenloft archetypes that I am editing at the moment, but I've also had a hand in a few suggestions of some design ideas for some really cool stuff. And like that goes from inspiration from cultural mythology. All mythology is cultural. I'll just say mythology. Yeah. Inspiration from mythology, inspiration from Gothic literature, inspiration from Gothic video games. If there's like a Gothic theme that you would find cool to explore as a player character, there's probably going to be something for you in there.
Yeah, if the people listening as well, you should definitely check out Darren Kenny, because they will have news about this.
What's the title for it? Confirm?
So
do we have a confirmed title?
I don't know, because I know there's been 2 titles that I know of. So I don't want to say the wrong. So I will say we'll put it out there, and the people listening, they can do some detective work.
Beyond that, I have exciting plans for next month, where I will be starting a piece which is going much more in depth than Odyssey Anthology Volume 2 in religious rites of ancient Greece and how to use those in Theros.
Ooh.
So like rules for like how to perform the rites, what effect they will have, how they differ for each god in the pantheon, and creating a sort of party sheet that, like, instead of like how Theros currently tracks how your favor with a god like goes up over the course of a campaign, like the aim of this will be like you have a party sheet that tracks your constant favor with all of the 15 gods.
Okay, fair.
So it kind of puts it into the context of like this world where all of the gods have an effect in the same way as in, say, the Iliad, where individual characters are watched over by particular gods, but the whole of like the battle outside Troy is being watched by all of the gods, who all have a bit of a stake in it.
So like, was it you ford a river you don't ask permission for, and then it's like, well, it's tacit, we'll remember this, like, negative.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so it's the sort of thing of like with the current rules, you have your patron god, but you're going to have to keep an eye on all of them.
That is something that always sometimes is hard to balance, like the idea of like there is like you always have like you maybe have 1 or 2 players who are connected to a god in particular, and it's easy to kind of balance there, but then it's like there is a whole other pantheon out there that I imagine probably may be adjacent or be aware of some of these comings and goings. It'd be really nice to kind of have like a toolkit or some rules to kind of, again, at least facilitate or like balance that. Again, good for Theros with their 15 gods. I don't even know how many gods there are in Forgotten Realms with their like 7 different pantheons per. So I think
there are a lot.
It sounds awesome. And anything else?
I do potentially have something lined up to be working on in June that I will be working on with Zeke Gonzalez, which is going into a bit of shared interest in ecology and evolution. It's are you familiar with After Man by Dougal Dixon?
I must admit, I could lie, but I'm going to say no. I'm afraid I'm not.
So it's a speculative zoology book.
Okay.
So like suggesting ideas of how animals we know today are going to evolve several million years in the future.
Okay, yeah.
And what we've been discussing is a sort of a bestiary of the future in D&D. Like, what would 1 million years of evolution do to common D&D monsters?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Fair. I can't imagine things like the Beholder getting much scarier, but I think you probably got a few things lined up, I imagine.
Yeah, there's some interesting ideas already. It's still like very 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 much like just had the idea to do this, but it's in the diary now. And we've got some good ideas to go ahead with.
Wow, that sounds awesome. So yeah, very very much something to kind of keep an eye on the radar then. Honestly, that's awesome. Frederic, again, thank you so much for taking some time to have this. Oh, did we get onto the thing of like where to hear about all this fantastic work? We didn't. No, this is the important part.
So the best way to keep track of everything I've worked on is through my mailing list, which is people can sign up to it at tinyletter.com/Kor-Artificer. Kor-Artificer is, well, it's going to be in.
There will be a link in the description. But it's KOR and then Artificer.
And then -Artificer. I'm on Twitter as @Kor-Artificer with no dash, and my Tumblr is Kor-Artificer with dash between the words.
Okay, I suppose, yeah, Kor-Artificer rolls off the tongue better than __ or core dash.
Yeah.
Well, no. Again, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. This has been a blast. Any sort of podcast I walk away feeling like I've learned something is always a good one. Shucks. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
No, it's been a delight. And yeah, I suppose in case people didn't know, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I have one or two things to plug, if you don't mind.
By all means.
There are a few Kickstarters going. There is the Comets and Cockpits Kickstarter, which I believe is something like 800% funded right now, which it seems a little bit excessive, but I believe we are inching closer to our final stretch goal, which is very exciting. The second funded Kickstarter is the Cities of Myth Atlantis, which is having its second go around, but it has already reached funding. But we're just looking to kind of, get towards some of those spicy stretch goals. So there are some beautiful custom dice. I think are still a few left. And there is also the last one is What a Lovely Adventure, which is a collection of LGBTQ plus inspired adventures, which is also on Kickstarter. And it is not yet funded, but it is running out of time. So it's a bunch of really fantastic stuff. It's been a very busy month. Again, I hadn't planned things poorly when to have all these kind of Kickstarters going. And well, I'm just writing in them, so I guess it's whoever's running them. But they've got their thing sorted. It's just me running around like a headless chicken. And yes, I've been Matthew Whitby, and you can find me at Whitby Writes. I think I've already said that. So thank you for listening. My final question then is, how do you end a podcast?
This was a tricky question to prepare for an answer for, but I'll go with the last line of my favorite Aristophanes play, The Clouds. So let the chorus file off the stage, its part is played.